Late Ptolemaic Egypt sat on a knife edge. The royal family ruled a rich kingdom, but their grip looked weaker every year as Rome's power pressed closer. Cleopatra VII rose into that danger, not as a settled queen, but as a young ruler forced to fight for her place inside her own dynasty. Power shifted fast, loyalty cost money, and any sign of weakness invited rivals to move in. Cleopatra's claim to the throne faced immediate challenges, and the stakes were personal. In this world, a defeated ruler did not simply lose an office. They could be arrested, dragged through the streets, and used as a living trophy to prove someone else's victory. Captivity meant public humiliation, and humiliation meant political death even before the body failed. For a monarch, survival and dignity became the same problem. That fear shaped every decision at the top, because if enemies closed in, the end might not arrive on a battlefield. It could arrive in chains, under guard, with a future written by the victor. And so one question hovered behind the throne: how did a ruler control their own ending? The way a queen died could protect her legacy or hand her enemies their most powerful spectacle. The rumor started small, then hardened into something specific. Ancient writers later claimed Cleopatra did not just fear death in the abstract, she studied it. The story said she gave orders for condemned prisoners to be used in poison trials, not for spectacle, but for information. Which toxin ended a life the fastest? Which one brought the least suffering? It sounded clinical. It also sounded terrifying. In this version of events, the prisoners already faced execution, and that detail mattered. It let the story present the trials as a grim extension of punishment, not random cruelty, but it still changed the meaning of a death sentence. The claim suggested a queen treated human bodies like evidence. Pain became something to measure. Time became something to compare, and the state became the hand that experimented. The rumor carried a sharp implication. Cleopatra wanted control over the one outcome no ruler could fully command. If capture ever came, she needed a way to choose how it ended. So the story framed these trials as preparation, almost like insurance. It also gave her enemies a ready-made picture of calculated brutality. Either way, the idea spread because it explained power in its harshest form. A queen planning her own ending. In the versions of the story that spread later, this was not one brutal experiment done once and forgotten. It sounded like a plan. The accounts claimed she set different poisons against each other, watching for the one that ended life quickly. Some toxins supposedly struck like a blow, others dragged time out. The point in these tellings was comparison, finding a method that left the least struggle behind. Those same stories claimed the testing went further than choosing a substance. They described changes in dose because a poison that killed at one amount could torment at another. A smaller measure might only weaken and panic. A heavier one might shut the body down. The rumor turned into a grim kind of measuring exercise. Repeat, adjust, observe. Not a single act of cruelty, but a program that refined its aim. And then there was the method of delivery. The tales claimed she compared how a toxin entered the body, swallowed in liquid, mixed into food, rubbed into an opening, or pushed under the skin. Each route changed the speed and the suffering, at least in the way these writers told it. Taken together, toxin, dose, and method formed a checklist. The story painted something systematic. Death treated like a problem to solve. Ancient writers did not stop at the rumor of tests. They claimed there were results. Some poisons, they said, ended things almost at once. A sudden fall, the body giving up before fear even had time to settle. Others dragged on, with cramps, choking, and long stretches of awareness. In these tellings, the difference mattered, because speed was not just mercy, speed was control. The reports sorted toxins into rough categories by what observers thought they saw. There were compounds that seemed to shut down breathing quickly, and others that looked more like burning from the inside, with vomiting and a slow weakening. A fast collapse meant fewer chances for guards to intervene, fewer chances for a dose to be taken back by force. A slow death created time for panic, resistance, and regret. For a queen planning for the worst, those details turned into planning questions. If capture came, what method worked even under stress? What acted reliably, even if swallowed badly or in a smaller amount? What left no room for a public struggle that could be used as humiliation? In the ancient versions, the point was not cruelty for its own sake. It was preparation, tested against failure. Rome's power did not stay far from Egypt for long. Cleopatra's rule became tied to a Roman civil war, the kind of conflict where yesterday's ally became tomorrow's executioner. She aligned herself with Julius Caesar, and that bond pulled Egypt into Rome's most dangerous politics. It also raised the stakes for her personally. If her Roman partner fell, her own position collapsed with him. Caesar's murder did not free Cleopatra from Rome's chaos. It trapped her deeper inside it. Power shifted to new strongmen, and she backed Mark Antony, one of the men fighting to control the Roman world. That choice brought protection, but it also created a single, clear enemy. Octavian rose against Antony, and every Roman victory against Antony felt like a step closer to Cleopatra's defeat. For Cleopatra, this was not abstract strategy. Roman civil war determined whether she stayed a queen or became a trophy. Octavian did not have to kill her to destroy her. He only had to capture her alive. A defeated rival could be dragged through Rome and displayed to prove his power. That prospect made the idea of an exit plan brutally practical. Survival started to include control over how it ended. At this point, the story depended on who told it and who survived to be heard. The fullest version came from Plutarch, a Greek writer living under Roman rule, who wrote long after Cleopatra's time. He described the poison tests as if they belonged to a larger pattern of calculation. But he never spoke from Egyptian court files. He spoke from a later world and from second-hand voices. Other Roman-era writers sat in the background, echoing pieces of the same idea. A dangerous queen, experimenting with death. Some framed her as a moral warning, others as a political villain, and the details shifted with the purpose. That mattered because Rome won the war and controlled the memory. The most valuable records for checking the claim, Egypt's own official documents, did not survive to balance the story. So the question stopped being only what Cleopatra did and became how the tale travelled. A rumour told by enemies sounded different from a report written by servants, doctors or administrators who worked for her. Plutarch and his peers offered compelling narratives, but they also wrote in a tradition that liked lessons. Pride punished, luxury condemned, power brought low. That tradition shaped what later generations believed happened. Historians then asked a simple question: could this even have worked? The ancient world knew poisons well enough to fear them, plant extracts, heavy metals, snake venom. But knowledge stayed uneven. Dosage shifted effects wildly, and a clean death rarely existed. What sounded like a controlled experiment often looked, in reality, like guesswork with lethal materials. Plausible ingredients existed. A reliable, repeatable outcome did not. They also weighed what punishment looked like for prisoners. Condemned people could be executed quickly, but they also suffered public deaths meant to warn others. That mattered, because the rumour required access, time, and a setting where repeated trials happened without political cost. Courts did use physicians and specialists, yet surviving records did not show an Egyptian file of trials, notes, or results. The story rested on later retellings, not direct documentation. That gap opened a door for propaganda. Roman writers often framed defeated enemies as exotic and cruel, and medicine became an easy tool for scandal. A queen who studied remedies could be recast as a queen who studied killing. Real pharmacology, testing antidotes, learning symptoms, preparing for emergency, could be twisted into a lurid claim about human experiments. With every retelling, moral judgment sharpened and plausible knowledge hardened into a headline. By 30 BCE, everything collapsed. Antony lost to Octavian, and soon after he died, leaving Cleopatra without her Roman shield. That shift mattered instantly. She was no longer negotiating as a partner in a civil war. She became a prize. Octavian's men moved in, and Cleopatra ended up under Roman control. From that moment, her future narrowed to one question. What did Octavian plan to do with her? For a defeated ruler, capture did not just mean imprisonment. In Rome, it could mean public humiliation as part of a victory parade, displayed as proof that the conqueror had crushed a foreign queen. Octavian had used symbols like that to build support, and Cleopatra's name carried enormous weight. Alive, she could be marched, pointed at, and turned into a warning. The power was no longer hers. Her body and her image became tools in someone else's story. Cleopatra faced the immediate reality that she might be kept alive for that spectacle. She needed time, leverage, and options, and she had very little of any of them. Any choice she made now carried consequences for her children, for Egypt's future, and for how she would be remembered. Octavian did not have to kill her. He could save her for later, and that possibility, the slow approach of a planned humiliation, turned the idea of a controlled death from rumor into an urgent practical problem. Cleopatra's situation reached its endpoint quickly. She had been taken under guard, and the threat that mattered most hung over everything. A public Roman victory parade with her as the prize. Then news spread that she had died. It was sudden and it was final. For Octavian, it removed a living symbol he could display. For Cleopatra, it closed the one door she still controlled. The best-known explanation blamed an asp, a venomous snake said to have been brought to her in secret and used to deliver a fatal bite. It sounded simple, almost ceremonial, and that was part of its power. But other accounts pointed elsewhere. They suggested a hidden poison, carried in a small container, or applied in a way that left little trace, chosen because it worked when time ran out. The uncertainty mattered because it pulled the earlier rumor back into the story. If Cleopatra had ever tried to learn which poisons killed fastest and with least suffering, that knowledge would have served a clear purpose here. It offered a motive, not proof. Ancient writers connected the dots because it made sense to them. But the ending stayed contested. Snakebite, poison, or a tale shaped to fit a queen's last act. By the time modern scholars looked back at the poison testing claim, they treated it less like a proven event and more like an old story built for effect. The ancient sources sounded confident, but they never showed records, names, or details that could be checked. Historians compared versions, weighed motives, and kept running into the same wall. The rumor survived. The proof did not. Toxicologists approached it differently. They asked what ancient poisons actually did, how fast they acted, and how hard it was to control pain and timing without modern dosing. Some outcomes described in the stories sounded possible. Others sounded too neat, like a lesson rather than an observation. And even if poison trials had happened somewhere in the ancient world, that still did not pin them to Cleopatra. Yet the tale kept returning because it served a purpose. In popular culture, it turned Cleopatra into a person who managed her own end instead of waiting for others to decide it. It also painted her as cold, willing to use prisoners as tools. That shorthand travelled well, even when the evidence stayed thin. It linked power to death and death to politics in a single brutal image.